Hi, thank you all for being here tonight. As Christy said, I'm Rachel Richter with Texas Parks and Wildlife. I work here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then Adam Henry in the hat back there is with USDA Wildlife Services, pretending like he doesn't know who he is. So we both are pretty familiar with this issue. I'm going to be covering the main top part, but Adam, feel free to chime in if you want to add anything. So I'm here this evening to give you all some information about what's going on, the laws surrounding it, and most importantly, how to prevent this from happening again. So there we go. Starting off, what is a rookery? If you're here, you're probably pretty familiar with that, but it is a nesting or roosting group of colonial water birds. These birds are typically attracted to mature tall trees that have dense canopy cover, and it's normally going to be relatively close to water. They can range in size from just a few nesting pairs of birds to literally thousands of birds. And these birds exhibit site fidelity, which means that the young, the adults and their offspring tend to return to the same site year after year. So they remember kind of where they were the year before, and we'll come back to it. Nesting season is typically February through October, and multiple species are involved. The reason why the birds do this is it's a survival strategy, right? They feel like if they nest in big groups, they're safer, they're protected from predators. So it's kind of a cool natural phenomenon unless it's in your yard, right? So when we have these birds select a place that is undesirable, like a residential, like a neighborhood, I don't have to tell you, if you're here, it's a big problem. It's loud, it smells, the ground is covered with all sorts of gross stuff like bird droppings, remnants of prey, babies that have fallen out of the nest that may be injured or dead, and then birds that are just hanging out on the ground for no apparent reason. As I mentioned, there are several species involved. When we're talking about nuisance rookeries in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we've kind of got 6 main species that we see most frequently. There can be others. The cattle egret is far and above typically the most abundant, but it's not going to be the only one. We also have little blue heron, black-crowned night heron, and the yellow-crowned night heron. And the night herons are the ones that you really kind of want to watch out for early in the season. And the reason for that is those 2 species are normally the first ones to arrive. They'll typically be the ones that show up in February. And they kind of act as scouts a little bit. And once these birds are attracted to groups of other birds, right? So once they see some birds have been established, more are going to come. And then we also have kind of the big white birds, the snowy egret and the great egret. These are birds that historically, in like the 1800s and 1900s, were almost hunted to extinction because of their big, pretty, long white feathers, because there was a really fantastic fashion trend that anyone who was anyone had like a part of a dead bird on their hat or dress or whatever. And so the significant decline in those species, along with several others, is what led to the creation of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So 1800s, early 1900s were not a good time for wildlife in general. That's when we had market hunting and really serious exploitation of our natural resources. So people at the time noticed that birds, many species of birds, not just the egrets, but songbirds as well, we're in serious decline, and we're disappearing for a lot of areas, and realize if we don't do something about this, we're not going to have any birds left. People would hunt them for like pet trade, to put on their hats or fashion, like I said. They'd also collect eggs to like decorate or put in collections and things like that. So to put a stop to all that, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was put into place. And this is actually an international agreement between the United States, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Russia. And what that means, the reason why it's an international agreement and the reason why that's beneficial is because a lot of our birds migrate, right? And so if we're doing something to protect them, but then they go to Mexico and then they just get, hunted out the wazoo, then that's not really going to do much to protect the birds. So actually, for anything in the Migratory Bird Treaty Act to change, all of the member nations that have signed on to the treaty have to agree to it. And a lot of times when we're talking about nuisance rookeries, people get the idea in their head that migratory birds means just like herons and egrets and the ones that are being kind of a pain to us right now. But this includes pretty much any native bird species. There's a few exceptions. So this includes things like cardinals or painted buntings or blue jays or ducks. They all have these protections. And so basically what it means is it's illegal to take, which is legalese term for kill, that is kill or injure, that kind of goes on with more adjectives for that word, or possess the birds or their eggs, their feathers, or nest, or any part of the bird. And the reason why it is that strict is because of that trend to collect and sell feathers and eggs and things like that. Violations of this can result in fines and jail times, and then most states have their own law that kind of backs this up as well. So in Texas, that's Texas Parks and Wildlife Code Chapter 64, has to deal with native birds. Basically, it's complementary to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. They're essentially the same. There's a few places where they differ, but they basically just back each other up. So this begs the question, when we have birds that have become problematic, what can we legally and not legally do? So it is legal, or let me rephrase that. It is not legal to kill or to injure an adult bird or to do something that causes the death or abandonment of an egg or a baby. So what that means is you can go out there and scare them off as long as you're not risking nest abandonment and you're not actually injuring or killing the birds. So there are lots of scare tactics and deterrents that can be used that we're going to get into, provided that there are no active nests anywhere in the colony. Once the first egg is laid anywhere in the colony, harassment has to stop, because at that point you're risking causing the death or abandonment of a nest. So this is why it's so important to act early on in the season, because once eggs are laid, you're pretty much locked in to dealing with those birds until they leave right about now through mid-October. So at the end of the nesting season, nests can be destroyed, and any long dead nestlings or non-viable eggs can be removed and destroyed without any sort of permit or special authorization. You can also go in and take down the old nesting material, which that's important to do because you don't want that to draw in birds for next year. But in order for that to happen, there has to be no babies no living babies that are still in the nest dependent on their parents that the parents are caring for. But you have to wait until they're leaving. There is a permit, the federal depredation permit, that authorizes the legal take of a limited amount of birds in the rookery. Now the key word there is limited. So, for example, if you are issued this permit by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the maximum amount of birds that you're going to be able to lethally remove is typically going to be about 10% of the colony. So if you have 200 birds in your rookery, removing 20 of them isn't going to do you a whole lot of good, because this includes adult birds and eggs, right? So the depredation permit is an important thing to have as a tool to keep in your toolbox, but it is not going to be a magic wand that just makes the rookery disappear. One way that you can use the depredation permit is it can allow you to have a little bit greater flexibility in continuing your harassment techniques a little bit longer after those first eggs are laid. And so typically a depredation permit is going to be issued to a city. This isn't something that is normally issued to individual homeowners in these cases, because in urban areas it's going to impact multiple homeowners. What it can do, if you have a depredation permit, for example, you can continue harassment even though the first eggs have been laid, and your intent is not to kill the birds, it's to continue doing all the things that you were doing, but it kind of covers you in the event that your harassment techniques accidentally result in the loss of a nest or the abandonment of a nest. But it's going to count towards however many you were issued. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. It's not going, if you already have birds laying eggs, it's probably not going to get rid of those birds, but it can stop more of them from showing up. So prevention is absolutely the key here, because once a rookery is established, not really much you can do. So early detection is super critical. Adam and I can tell you we've worked with many communities, and unfortunately the way that it normally plays out the first time a community has dealt with this is the city officials that are in the position to be able to help don't know about it until it's already too late to do something about it. And that's really unfortunate, but that's just kind of the way it goes. The harassment activities are most effective if they're focused on the sentry birds or the scout birds, those birds that show up first. They're nervous, they don't feel like they have that safety in numbers, and they're a lot more easy to scare away at that point. Birds that show up later, they assume that those scout birds have done their job, and they're a little bit more reluctant to leave at that point. And of course, you really need to prevent establishment before that first egg is laid. Public awareness is super important in this. A lot of times people see like 1 or 2 birds in their neighborhood and they think like, oh, that's a really cool looking bird, because they all are cool looking birds in moderation, right? But people see a few and they think they're kind of cool, and they're not concerned about it until there's like 100 of them, and then it's already too late, right? Another problem that we see is, these birds, as I mentioned, they'll come back to the same place every year. So you may have a few birds on a property or in an area that have kind of come every year, but they've never really been a problem, and then one year it kind of explodes. So those are kind of things to look out for, and why it's important to act quickly. So what are these scare tactics that you can do? They basically fall into 2 main categories: noise deterrence or visual deterrents. So noise is pretty intuitive. It's things that sound unpleasant to the birds. So there are machines that you can get that are specifically programmed to make predator calls of herons and egrets that can play. And I've heard kind of some cities have said that they've had really good success with that. And then other things are things like bangers and screamers, propane cannons, firecrackers, anything that makes a loud kind of startling noise. It's a little bit annoying to have these things going on outside of your house, but much less annoying than the birds are going to be. You can also have, so the visual deterrents are mylar tape and scare eye balloons. You can hang those in trees. And basically they are shiny, they move, they've got this big scary looking eye thing on them, and birds don't like them. They make them nervous. You can also do things, looks like they've got a kit up here for y'all. You can do things like kind of throwing tennis balls, like motion deterrent type thing, not at the bird, but just in the general area that the bird is in to kind of make the leaves around it rustle. Similarly, you can take like your garden hose, not your heavy duty power sprayer, and kind of spray it in the area that the birds are to startle them, give them that kind of like reinforcement on, you know, you can go out, blow an air horn, and then maybe they're kind of like, okay, well the air horn doesn't mean anything, but then maybe if the leaves around them start moving, that might be a little bit like, okay, I probably need to pay attention to that. You can even go as far as removing early nesting material. So assuming no egg has been laid anywhere in the colony, you can go and you can actually knock the nest out of the tree as the birds are building them. Of course, you just have to make sure before you do that there is not an egg in the nest. And the gold star activity in terms of stopping egrets and herons from establishing on your property is to modify the habitat. So if you'll remember, I said they prefer trees that have big, thick canopies. These birds prefer trees with 75% canopy cover or greater. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, those overlapping branches help them to move among the trees more easily. And two, they feel sheltered and protected in all that cover. So if you thin your tree canopies below, below 70%, it has been proven to be very effective in stopping the birds from coming, because they see that, they don't even feel comfortable, they don't really recognize it as a viable habitat. And if they do kind of hang out for a little bit, they're way nervous and they're much easier to scare off and more responsive to those other deterrent activities. And so this picture here, you can probably tell this is like a before and after. Like one side of the street has been done and the other hasn't. And that, to kind of give you an idea, and this is the same thing, we're not asking you to cut your trees down. You will still have trees, you will still feel like you live in a neighborhood with trees, but the canopy is thinner, and what you're doing is just opening up that canopy so that you can see daylight through it, right? You can see the sunshine to the ground, and it's much more open. This is, without a doubt, the most effective thing. And what's good about it too is it provides a little bit longer lasting prevention. If you trim your trees, it's going to take a while for those trees to grow back, right? It's not a forever solution, but you can probably get a couple years out of it. If you go outside and blow an air horn or throw some firecrackers on the ground, you're going to have to do that like every 10 minutes, right? Because that's only as good for as long as the bird was nervous, and then it's going to fly back. One thing that's really important is that this kind of needs to be a community-wide effort. Because we've worked with communities in the past where the people who dealt with it, went and dealt with it one year, went and kind of did everything they could and trimmed their trees and were super on top of deterrents and things like that. And then the people like a block over were like, that'll never happen here. and then the next year, where do you think the birds go? And with the situation that Hurst has been dealing with, I understand it's been pretty much contained to one property. So we're gonna, I'm sure the plan is to go in and make that property undesirable for these birds. So if you live in that surrounding area, you need to be thinking about this too. Because again, these birds have site fidelity. They're gonna return to the same area next year, and they're going to be looking, they'll see that property that they're at now and say, well, no, it's not as nice this year. Neighborhood really went downhill, and they'll look for an area that is appealing, probably nearby. And this can unfortunately turn into a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole sometimes. And so it's really important that everyone who has mature trees on their property with that canopy cover, go ahead and get your trees trimmed. You want to do that in the fall, well in advance of the birds arriving. And then ideally you want to keep up a combination of these techniques through about June. So starting when you first see birds and then carry on through about June. If you make it to June and you don't have any nesting birds, you're probably good. Even when you get your trees trimmed, like I said, there may be some birds that are kind of like, hey, I was here before, maybe I should come and check it out again. But they'll be way more responsive to those deterrent activities. So it's just important to kind of keep up, fire on all cylinders until you know you've made it into the clear. Just a quick summary. If I haven't gotten this point across, early detection and preventing this in advance are the most critical things, because you really have to get this done before the first egg is laid. This is something that you'll probably have to deal with for multiple years, but if you can convince the birds to move elsewhere, you're saving yourself a lot of headache in the future. And with that, Adam and I will be happy to answer any questions y'all have. Not Adam, just me, just kidding.
So the birds we see now, they're still moving on, or, because I've seen some already.
Right. Well, I guess, what do you mean? Like
they're not going to nest right now.
No, it's way too late for them to start building extra nests. Sometimes you will see some birds that nest later in the season. So typically if that happens, like they may have had like a first nest that failed, and then they feel like there's still enough time. But I mean, that's maybe like Adam, July at the latest. So you're not gonna have birds nesting now. So what you're seeing is birds that haven't migrated wherever they're gonna go for the winter yet. And you'll probably see some juveniles that have that kind of scraggly mottled look hanging around in areas that they just haven't decided to leave quite yet. But yeah, so it's birds that are still hanging around that haven't made their way on yet.
I didn't have hundreds, I had thousands.
Thousands, yeah.
And all I have now is 2 giant egrets. I don't know why they're not leaving.
Yeah, so
They're all gone except those 2.
those 2, and so it sounds like, but there's not any nest or anything like that?
They have a nest, but it's
Empty?
they're not feeding anything, or they just fuss all day.
Yeah, they just want to make your life a little more miserable, right? So in a situation like that, if you have birds that are still hanging around, it's the end of nesting season, it's very clear that they don't have babies in a nest, or eggs in a nest that they're sitting on or whatever, you can go ahead and encourage those birds to go elsewhere. So you can go outside and you can bang like pot lids together at them, or any of those other, yeah. I mean, I would avoid spraying the bird directly with water because you risk injuring it, right? Especially if you're using something like super high powered. But spray in their area, or do it in a way where you're not gonna like hurt them. But you can, if you're confident that they're done nesting, you can encourage them to go, and you can start taking out like the nesting material from the trees and stuff.
They nest at the very, very top.
Yeah.
And these trees are way tall. I
Yeah.
don't know how I'm gonna get them down.
Air horns didn't bother them. Lawnmowers didn't bother them.
No.
Yeah.
And they became accustomed to that.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I didn't mention. Sometimes when this comes up, people get, we've had bad information get put out there in the past about what can and cannot be done. So anything that is like a standard daily activity in your neighborhood, like mowing your lawn or watering your lawn, the garbage truck going down the street, all that stuff is okay. Because and from a biological standpoint, those birds selected the location that they did with all of that stuff going on. So the lawnmower, they've heard it before, it's not gonna scare them. Yes,
What about obnoxious Labrador?
an obnoxious Labrador,
He seemed to kept, we live right next door to her,
yeah,
and he's kept him out of our yard.
yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Well,
Yes,
when they leave, because this is my son's house,
uh-huh,
this is August 29th.
uh-huh,
It's just 3 houses. He lives on Cliffwood.
right.
But there was like 50 of them. Do they travel like that? 50 of them decide to go live in that tree?
Yeah, I mean, they're colonial birds, right? So they live in groups. So they will, I mean, they're not, those cattle egrets are not going to stay in that tree forever, or not even for very long, because they're just roosting, they're just resting, they're not, building a nest or anything like that. But they do travel in groups when
and they like to
forage.
be at the tippy toppest part of
Uh-huh.
the tree.
Yep.
That's where they build it in.
And,
Yeah.
and how would she have
Which
known?
kills
How
the
will we know
cat
if we see
theory.
1 or 2 birds? How do we know if they have eggs or they don't have eggs? The trees are too tall to go up there and look.
Right. So I have seen cities get pretty creative with this in the past. Sometimes they'll use a cherry picker, or they can use like a really long pole that has a mirror on it, or some people will take like a smartphone or a little video camera and put it in video mode, and you can put it up and you can look in the tree. And then when you come back, you can watch the video and you can see what's in there.
Video drones?
So drones, Adam, do you want to talk about drones?
So drones, well, this is really your guy, but one thing that Rachel is alluding to with drones is that there is another act called the Airborne Hunting Act, which precludes the use of aerial equipment for harassment of birds by the layperson.
What about to inspect the nest?
Right, and
You have to have a commercial license to be a law operator.
you do, and you also have to have a permit from Texas Parks and Wildlife to fly it. So there's a lot of factors in permitting in there for using it. I worked with USDA. I'm USDA Wildlife Services, and so as a federal entity, we're exempt from that Airborne Hunting Act. So we use a drone for a lot of different things on birds. We have used a drone to check nests. Once we get to that point and you have that many birds, you've almost got to the point where there's going to be eggs in nests. When you have hundreds of birds in trees, there's going to be eggs in nests.
But she's talking about the first few. How
Right,
would you
first
know?
few. The biggest one-
Her trees are over 100 feet tall.
The first few, what we have to look for is yellow-crowned night herons. We're not looking for white fluffy birds at the top of the tree.
Right.
We're looking for yellow-crowned night herons because they have been here before those other birds get here. The difficult part with that is that the activity on a yellow-crowned night heron is very low. There's only probably maybe 2 to 3 nesting pairs in a big tree. They're not very active in the daytime, hence yellow-crowned night heron. They leave at night and go feed and do their activity in the cover of darkness. So we go to work, we come home, and we probably never see those birds because they're sedentary in the trees all day long, and then they leave when we go in to go to bed. So they're out doing their activity once we're going to bed. So that's the key that we have to start looking for. The things that we would look for on her residence, it's kind of tough because she's got a nice big yard, so it's hard to see it. But if we were on, say, a city street and we had trees on the curb, you can look for droppings at the base of the tree, kind of right out in the street. You'll see a fecal deposit start building up right there. We want to check out and see what kind of birds we have in those trees. That's something that we're working with folks with City of Hurst to start having their people start looking for those telltale signs of birds being there, specifically yellow-crowned night herons, so that we can get to them first and stop them from nesting, hopefully, or run them out of those trees and prevent the other birds from
Are
coming.
they annoyed by light? So if
They-
you put
they
light
can
up
be.
in the trees?
They can be, but
Ask if we turned on all
the
our
biggest,
lights.
well, the biggest thing is trimming the trees.
Right.
If we do the preventative of trimming those trees, yellow-crowned night herons are not gonna select your tree in your yard for a place to nest. So that's where we're at. If you trim trees, trim trees, trim trees,
So, yeah, but
We
we're
will stop
talking
that
for
from
like our yard, thousands
Thousands of-
thousands of dollars to trim
Right.
trees, just like her.
right.
I have 3 acres of them.
Are
Right.
they as noisy as the?
No, you probably will not hear yellow-crowned night herons make any vocalization. Most of what you're hearing when those birds are coming back are calls to feed and vocalizations looking for other birds to talk to them. And so you shouldn't hear that much with the yellow-crowned night heron.
Would you give whip lessons?
Say that again.
Would you give whip lessons?
Whip lessons?
That-
Yeah.
I tell you, that works.
So we came to her property to do an inspection to see what age the birds were. And I happened to pull out a bullwhip, and I used a bullwhip as a noisemaker.
Boy, they
Again, I usually slide under the radar on firecracker laws and things like that because it's a bullwhip technically, and so they can't come harass me when I use a bullwhip as a noisemaker. And it's always a fun tool to use, and everybody likes it whenever we
I'd
crack a
probably
bullwhip.
whip my head right off.
Right, there's a few scars in here when the whip came around when I learned it.
But if you've been to her area,
Yes,
then
ma'am.
you
To her
know,
house, yes, ma'am.
then you know that they have, there's
We're right there
several
at 'em.
large properties,
Mm-hmm.
and then the park, which is the most secluded part of that big park.
Mhm.
So 2 or 3 trees could have 2 night herrings apiece in it, and nobody would know it,
Nobody
and then
would
all
know.
of a sudden, all of them come, and nobody can do anything.
Right, and that's the challenge of, we all have to take responsibility for our own property, police our own property, making sure that we do the check and try to run those birds off.
It just almost seems like it can't be beat.
So is
Unless
Chisholm
you're
Park
out-
gonna go in and trim all their trees?
Say that
Is
again?
Chisholm Park gonna go in and trim all their
too.
trees? Cause they're right there at us. So they're
There's 3
there.
houses that face Chisholm Park,
I
and we're right behind it.
have encouraged the city to
Okay.
trim their trees. Whether or not they take me up on that offer is their
That is true.
issue to worry about, but that is something that we talked with every city that we've dealt with, that I've dealt with, is towing the line and making sure that city property is trimmed up, just like we're asking the residents to do and trimming their trees. So, yes, sir.
So, in terms of ecosystems and things like that, it seems like anytime you have that much abundance of feces and birds that close together, there's diseases and pathogens and things like that. So like with the city park and the duck population there, and then, our own animals and doggies and stuff, tracking stuff into the house and this, that, and the other. Is there ever a reason that you would go in and use very significant, like kill 'em all type strategies? Because at some point, to me, human health safety has to trump, it's one thing
It
if a
does.
bird
Yes,
stinks, or if a bird's loud.
And we have
Whenever
to-
it starts being an endangerment because my kid can't play outside, well, that's a little different.
Right, and the way that, we have to define some of those terms, how we use them in our society today. And one of those is public health and human safety, or private health and human safety. And the way it's been explained to me, where, say, the health department came in, the county health department came in and declared something a health safety risk, because some of this is on private property, that would be considered a private issue. Say if it was at the park and it was deemed a health issue at the park, that would be considered a public health issue. So those two are hard to use when we have private landowners and private property. To declare it a private health risk is to her, not to the greater good of the community, kind of a thing. So it's a touchy situation when we start using that word. Certainly, there have been issues where our agency has come in and removed numbers of birds. Health safety is one, flight safety is a big key one. So Shepherd Air Force Base up in Wichita Falls in 2013 had a training plane go down after it ingested an egret. And so that was a situation where we knew the egret rookery was there. It was depopulated, I guess, for the better use of a term. But
How were they removed?
How were they removed?
How did y'all remove them?
By hand. But the tree, you have to understand, the trees were about 6 feet tall. And so you could physically, and it was a rather small
So would
rookery.
you put them in a crate or something and then relocate them, or what'd you do with them?
No, ma'am, anything we caught was euthanized. And so it was small birds. It wasn't the older birds. What we were trying to do is remove that rookery till we found a new place to go. And so again, that's flight safety versus human health and safety. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have 2 questions. When should we start looking for those scouts?
Early February,
Early February?
I'd start looking for yellow-crowned night herons.
And then, so I guess I have 3 questions. So if we see the night herons, who are we going to contact in the city? So, or, I mean, I guess I could go ring that person's doorbell, but wouldn't I also want to let the city know, I've seen these crown herons at this place, we need to get this neighborhood, we need to get everybody to do a lookout, so.
Who's your contact for the city of Hurst?
For Century Birds would be the Parks Department.
Parks
Parks
Department.
Department,
So,
okay.
City of Hurst, Parks Department,
Okay.
give them a call. Now, we have to understand that that doesn't necessarily mean that there's gonna be action from the city to help remove those birds if it's on private property. Private
But
landowner's
there
gonna need
was,
to do that.
but when we went to, I went to that meeting that we had with,
Bonnie,
yeah, well, no, it was the, animal
Hurst.
control, Hurst Animal Control. They talked about the fact that they were going to be doing, educational outreach to the people in Bedford, Hurst, and Colleyville, because that neighborhood is 3 cities in the neighborhood, to educate people. And so I'm assuming that the city's gonna, if we spot something, the city's gonna help us get the word out.
I believe that's kind of what
That
we
was
want you to do.
kind of what they had
So if
said.
you guys are seeing it, boots on the ground, y'all are seeing birds in February, we need to get the ball rolling and make phone calls. But right now is the time to start not having the problem.
And the big thing that we can do is to, if we trim our canopies down to where there's 70% or less, the egrets will not come back.
That's, we're, that's a big, yeah.
when would
Yeah.
you sign that?
Yeah,
We're
right,
gonna
you sign it, that's why I have a pen.
But you said
It's on video.
that is the most successful,
That is going to be the most successful deterrent,
But not guaranteed.
but not guaranteed.
And
I can only hope that if you trim that canopy down to 70%, and 70%, we understand that when we trim trees, there's a tree trimming standard by the arborists in the nation, and that 70% is the bottom of what they recommend you take off of your tree. So that's the bare minimum we bring that tree down to for good health of the tree. But it does a whole lot of things different. If you look at her trees in her yard, the destructive activity of egrets on them has probably done some bad things to those trees. So trimming your trees with a professional is going to ensure the health of those trees. We're going to do more than just keep birds away. We're going to make sure those trees stay alive and keep living and do good things for us here on earth. So there's a good thing that we need to do with that. So hopefully multiple years are going to be achieved by that trimming, because it's going to take multiple years for those trees to come back
There's
into
an
that bushy state.
undeveloped lot next to me
Mhm.
that is just solid.
Solid trees, yeah.
It's solid.
And
You
yet-
saw it and you were there.
And yet they saw your pretty face and decided to come hang out with you
And
and
have been there.
stay there.
You've been there for over 61 years.
Right.
and
There-
one thing just to mention about the trimming of the trees, one thing to look into is contact some different companies in your area and see if they're willing to offer a group discount if multiple of y'all within one area are willing to contract with them. Some folks have had some success with that in the past. It's not gonna be $0, but it can at least maybe save you a little bit of money.
I just can't see being able to afford 3 acres.
Yeah.
I have thousands.
Well, what if we did part of it? What if we did the trees closest to the house on what we could afford, and a few of those, and push those birds, if they just decided to come back, hopefully we would push them either to your neighbor's tree, because they're gonna wanna trim their trees. Or we could
They
push
got
them
to
out,
get
or we
off.
could push them out to the
You
street,
know, we
right?
have an obnoxious lab,
Right.
just kept them out.
Obnoxious lab, okay, we're gonna go with obnoxious lab, for the rest of us that don't wanna feed that
We'll
obnoxious
hire him
lab.
out.
If
Right,
everyone wants to swing by the animal shelter on their way out.
right. Adopt an obnoxious lab or
Right,
dog.
Matt will go take care of everybody's yard.
Right.
But
Give us a
I
schedule.
can remember when we tried to get someone to maybe give us a deal on helping get our trees.
Right.
And we had several tree companies say they wouldn't come because of the danger.
Because you had birds in the tree,
They said it stays there in the restroom,
in the restroom,
of the nastiness of the desk.
So
okay.
that I think is probably a coded way to say we don't want to do it.
Yeah, I think that's somebody saying they don't want
Do
your
you remember
business.
that one?
We are not aware of any instance of someone actually contracting a disease from a rookery. Now, I'm not saying it couldn't ever happen, but there is no documented case of it happening. I understand the reason for the concern about the diseases, because it's gross, and there's a lot of nasty stuff in there. You know, and I definitely would not recommend to anyone that you roll around in it, you know. Personal hygiene and common sense precautions are important, but I don't think that it would present a serious health risk to someone going in there and trimming the trees.
I
Especially-
disagree.
Especially if we have a few more rainstorms, say we
No,
wait till
they
October.
lived through all that.
What, the
They
birds?
survived the
The
high
birds did.
winds we had and all those heavy
Right.
Well,
rains.
not
and-
all of them, we should get 100 of them.
Well, but then it turns powdery
Right.
and then it becomes airborne and all, so. No, and it has affected her and she's just too hard-headed to say it has.
I really
Well,
think there are tree trimmers that want your business that will come and do it anyway. I know there's a gentleman down in Burleson that came to an eager meeting one year that offered his services and wasn't hesitant about offering those services down there. I don't know if he works up in this side of
Where
the
do you
country.
dispose of it? Doesn't that become a hazmat with the disposal of where you're gonna put the nest and the stuff that's still there?
As far as I know, no. They're just
Really, we
loaded
were
in a
told it
truck.
was.
Well, by who? By who?
Well, I
I'd
know
be
my
curious.
oncologist told me not to go.
Y'all were
forever.
never,
Right.
so you just have to suit up and all that and it would become a hazmat?
Cause I
Spot.
asked her, I said, can I please, I just want permission to go help her.
Right.
And my oncologist said, no.
Well, then
So I didn't.
I can't. If you ask a doctor, he's gonna tell you to go get all your shots and make sure you have all the things, and again, I don't know. I certainly would not go and work there without PPE. So that whether that's just a dust mask and gloves, that, I walked in her yard as I am and I walked all the way through it. I didn't touch anything, and I certainly didn't lick my lips after I got done. So that's common stuff, whether I walk into a, you know, if we're gonna walk into that environment, whether that's on a slaughter room floor, doing disease sampling, I'm gonna have PPE on. Those same people that are gonna work out there, you should have PPE on whenever you go out there in your yard. Right, booties, and they sell all that stuff, so I would encourage you to have all of that if you're going to be working in that environment. That's standard OSHA PPE, I mean, that's just common sense stuff. So those are the things that you should have if you're going to be dealing with it. And I would hope that if you had tree trimmers coming out, that they would have
They would
PPE
know
on, that would know that. Again, they're not licking their hands and consuming things. Hopefully if he's, you know, gonna smoke a cigarette or something like that, they leave, wash their hands, and then smoke their cigarette and do what they need to do.
Are you talking about tree trimmers getting the nest now?
That's what I would encourage you to do. If you're gonna have your trees trimmed, I would not waste time pulling them down yourself. I would hire the tree trimmers to pull those
Even
nests
with the
down.
big ones still there?
Well,
long
they're
as
not
it's not
actively
eggs.
nesting. Nesting season is over.
Yeah, I don't know why they're there.
Yeah.
But it's the two big ones.
so.
They're just comfortable, they're just hanging out,
You got another
but,
question?
No, that was it.
like I said,
Where
you
do
can
where
scare them
where do
off.
They
go?
get the fish
Do they go down to
from
Mexico this
the
time of
pond,
year?
and then
They,
there's a
they will
pond
hang here for a
behind.
while.
They get,
So they'll be
and they bring
resident
these
here
little
for a
fish
good long
out
while
of
and then they'll
Yeah.
They
migrate
don't
south.
eat them, they just drop them in the driveway.
Head on out for even further.
It's like
south
a
to
gift
Mexico.
for you, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, yeah, just what you wanted.
So when the scout birds
We'll
come
be
in
back next
February,
year. We'll leave
egrets
this in.
come and
They didn't drop them on
March,
my head.
we should see
Oh, I'm
yellow
so
crown
sorry.
night herons and then egrets will trickle up as the weather permits. And all of the other snowy egrets and great egrets and blue herons and.
So where is the heronry now? Where would they be, like Panama?
No, they're still here. We still have birds here hanging
I'm
out.
talking about the large flocks that disappeared.
And they're here between here and South Texas and they're just around, still resident. I saw a ginormous flock. And I'm not sure that they're not still on a nest, but in Godly, there is a ginormous, there's probably 4,000 to 5,000 birds in 2 trees right there. I mean, looked like solid white Christmas tree when I drove down the county.
She had to have at least 3,000 in her backyard.
Right, right. And why they were still all there, I think they're just there. It's just, that's where we're hanging out because they're feeding in the pastures. And they're working in all the fields. I mean, we have birds flying to feed those young. If I use Shepherd Air Force Base as a model, 10 to 12 miles just to go from the nest out to feed, turn around and come back to feed those young. So they do that 3 or 4 times a day, different flights. So you have mom and dad doing that flight
So
3 to 4 times a day.
their range is like 12 miles from their nesting area.
At least 20, I would say, if they
At
had
least
to.
20.
Yeah. So that becomes a greater effect here in the Metroplex because what else do we have? We have
Stock tanks everywhere.
we have DFW, we have Love Field, we have airports that are going on with.
Well, they finally took out the food source of DFW.
Oh, okay.
Why did they?
They had they had an agricultural area out there when they first built the airport.
Right.
And we were the bird strike capital of the world.
Yeah.
So they removed all the agriculture and minimized the bird strikes.
Well, there you go. We solved it.
Why do they throw the baby birds out? I think always pitiful, they're
I
cute little
don't,
things.
I don't know that they're actively throwing them out. I think that they're just active enough in the nest not to hang on and they fall out.
And they're just.
And
Whatever.
sometimes
Oh,
sibling
so
rivalry is a thing with these birds sometimes.
We have multiple birds in a nest. We had 4 birds in a nest this year in Wichita Falls. So there's multiple eggs, so you have sibling rivalry going on right there.
Well, that's another question I had. Are they like chickens, so they have daily eggs, so they have a baby and then like a month-old and then a teenager?
Yeah,
Do
I
they
mean, you
have
can
all
only,
ages?
you can only develop 1 egg a day, so we're gonna have,
But like
ages.
birds have
we
just.
have multiple nesting cycles within that rookery. So
Okay.
birds that show up early are gonna nest early, and then about midway through the summer, you have another flock that gets old enough and wants to start laying eggs, and they come and join, and then we have a third one. We saw at least 3 different age groups in a rookery earlier in the year. And again, it's oldest to youngest, but it's done that way for weather events, right? If you had all of your eggs at once, that's not a very good cycle to have, and if we had a tornado or a rainstorm and it knocked every one of them out, that whole population died. So
But like blue jays do that, don't
Right.
they? Don't they just have one? I don't know, I had
Oh,
a
you're
bird.
biologist, tell me.
And it
So
just seemed like it was, all the eggs were there and then they all, broke about the same time and
Right.
the mother fed them and after they were big enough, and they were gone, that's when I knocked their nest down.
Right, so it's very species dependent with birds. So some species, I'll say, I think most species of birds will kind of lay their eggs around a series of days. It's not like a chicken where they're laying an egg every single day for however long. But when they're ready to reproduce and their eggs are ready, there's some species that might lay them kind of like 3 or 4 at once, or there might be some that lays like 1 this day and then 2 and then 1. So you're right. Like most songbirds and stuff will have kind of closely related in age babies, and they might kind of hatch at a staggered thing. I imagine it's probably the same with most of the herons and egrets. But like Adam has said, they can have multiple nesting cycles, especially if one nest fails, they'll nest again. And so I honestly don't know offhand what the frequency is of having like a newly hatched baby and like a teenager in one nest is. But within a single rookery, that's definitely going to be common to see, because you've got multiple species and you've got birds that are laying eggs at different times. So.
Because that's what I noticed at hers. It was little ones, and then, you know, bigger ones. It was all different ages.
Right, and we were at a community not that long ago where, you know, in one section of the neighborhood, it was pretty clear that they were done using the nest. Like, they were just sort of like what you were describing. They just had some birds hanging around, but they weren't dependent anymore. And then a few blocks over, they were itty bitty babies, you know. So it just kind of depends. Not all the birds arrive at the same time. There's different species. They're not going to lay their eggs all at the same time, and then you have multiple waves of egg laying. So.
What else? Yes, sir.
Non-nesting sites, is it illegal to kill these birds?
Yes.
How do they do that when you can kill ducks?
So.
That's her.
So ducks are a game species, which means that you can hunt them by legal means and methods with a permit, with a hunting license, right? Just like it's legal to hunt a deer, but not legal to hunt a coati. Or, you know, other non-game species. So there are, within the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, I think there's about 50 species that are identified as game species that can be hunted with a hunting license.
During a certain time of year.
Right, yeah.
But if we can get all 5 of those countries to agree, I mean, at least we know we had Russian collusion at some point in there, right? So we can guarantee it, right? So we had it, but if we can think we could get it back again to rearrange this permit, it's gonna be pretty tough to get everybody meeting heads right there on all those to change that. So that's the tough part.
Sandhill cranes are supposed to be pretty tasty, but I don't know about cattle egret.
Surely they gotta taste good. There's gotta be some part that if you can find a Louisiana person to cook that up, surely we can get
Well, it won't
somebody
taste
from
like
Louisiana.
chicken.
Right, it won't taste like chicken after they get done.
So maybe one positive thing about cattle egrets, unlike the other species, they actually predominantly eat insects. So they're pests themselves, but they also help to control our bug population. Not that that makes any of this better, but
They bring it back and leave it in.
yeah, and they bring it back and
As soon as
leave
they
it as
left,
a gift for Miss Roberts.
as soon as they left, the finches showed up. All the other species of birds, the songbirds all started showing up before they start to migrate. And it was like, there goes the neighborhood, and all of a sudden, they're gone. Now they're back.
The finches came back.
Finches
Yeah.
all came out. So that lends that other, let's trim trees and make sure we don't have them ever in your respective neighborhoods over your respective houses. They're great to watch where they're not a nuisance on somebody's lake or a different tree or somebody else's property, but not on ours, not in town.
So we have an injured teenager.
An injured teenager.
Blue quail, on that, like quail run and blue quail. He's got a
Okay.
broken wing.
Broken wing. We'll send the squad out for
And
it.
it's
Broken
actually
wing.
been there for a few days, and I'm shocked at that, because we have a good wildlife, but he's still there.
He was right, I mean, on their porch practically on that corner house.
Oh, I didn't see it, it was in my yard today, but I mean, he's been there for a while, so that's good. I
There you
mean,
go.
If I can say something real quick, my name's Jim Pellman, I work for the First Police Department, obviously, and I'm associated with Animal Services. Look around right now, you asked about public education, and we put this out, and if you look at the adults in the room, including the lady who left earlier, we've got 12 people that showed up for this meeting. And if you look at the people who work for governmental entities here, we've got 7 people from the different governmental entities here. So it's important for y'all to be ambassadors. I mean, I know y'all two live right next door to each other, and you're gonna work together to make sure the egrets go somewhere else. But y'all need to talk to the people around you. You know, we can't convince people to do it. Y'all are gonna be the best people to keep the interest of and give testimony to what it was like living in it or right next door to it. So, you know, like I said, the next time we do a meeting like this, I'd love to see 100 people here. but there's only 12 of you that showed up, and I applaud y'all for being here. I'm really glad to see you, but I'd really like to see y'all talking to your neighbors and talking it up and making them realize that, hey, it's great for it not to be in your yard. It'd really be good not to have it next door or the next door to that either.
Well, did you just notify Hurst? Because
No, it was on-
all around me, it's calling.
No, it was on Nextdoor,
Oh,
and it was on the Hurst website. It was on Nextdoor, and there was notification, absolutely. But and that's another thing, the city limits running through there. We want as much involvement as we can, and we're going to work with these folks. Adam's going to come back and spend a lot of time with us in the coming months to help us out. But it's going to be up to the individual landowners to get it started and keep it going. Anyway, thank you.